Good afternoon, conference. 4 years ago, Boris Johnson, remember him? He promised to build 40 new hospitals. Guess what? There wasn't 40. They're not new, and they're not all fully fledged hospitals. That bold promise was a barefaced lie. Boris Johnson, eh? Who would have thought? Now, many of the projects that make up the government's new hospital programme, its official title, are in fact renovations or expansions of existing sites. And several of the projects were approved and underway long before Boris Johnson came up with this particular three-word slogan. The Conservatives tried once again to pull the wool over people's eyes, and now their promises are being exposed for what they are. Now, by the government's own admission, they will not complete all 40 projects by 2030. There's also scepticism about whether they can eradicate RAC from NHS buildings by 2035, and many argue that their target to do that simply is not ambitious enough in the first place. Now, we, as Liberal Democrats, have led the way in exposing the true state of our hospitals, and my team in Parliament and I, thank you very much, team, have been working hard to get information out of the government on the progress of the new hospital programme. In February last year, we discovered that barely any of the projects had even got planning permission. Only 10 out of the 40 projects had received full planning permission, and several projects had received no planning permission at all. This year, too, we discovered that hospitals were spending millions tackling pest infestations. One hospital told us they had found mice in the kitchen, maggots in the mortuary, and rat droppings in a corpse bag. Another told us of insects biting the legs of staff, ants and fly infestations, as well as rats in the ambulance area. One hospital reported pests in the children's ward and in their breast clinic. A breast clinic. In a separate investigation, we found that hospitals across the country were battling sewage leaks, pouring into hospital wards, showing again how the NHS is struggling to cope with rising repair bills. Conference, this sounds more like an episode of horrible histories than the state of our NHS. In my own area of West Hertfordshire, I've seen the state of Watford General Hospital that serves my constituents in St Albans. I've seen firsthand the faulty lifts, the aged ventilation system, the tiny corridors, the unacceptably cramped surgical and treatment wards, many of which are in crumbling, life-expired buildings. And I can reveal today that in the most recent weeks leading up to our conference, we have discovered something else. We now know that more than 2,000 hospital buildings were built before 1948, making them older than the NHS itself. Now, conference, the Conservatives have let the NHS literally crumble before our eyes, and they've allowed the bill for hospital repairs to grow and grow and grow. It will now cost almost £12 billion just to clear the backlog of repairs. To make matters worse, they are pilfering money from NHS capital budgets to plug Conservative cuts to frontline spending. And now that their new hospital programme is completely stuck in the mud, they're just trying to keep their commitment into the long grass. That's why today I'm moving this motion to highlight the many ways the government is failing to tackle the crisis in our hospitals and our calls on them to finally fix this mess. Our calls aim to pressure the government to get their new hospital programme back on track. That starts by calling on the government to release the funds for those hospitals that are ready to get going so that construction can start as soon as possible. In my own area of West Hertfordshire, do you know how many times I've asked the government in Parliament to release the funds? I've asked 16 times. There is no reason for some of these hospital programmes to be held back, and every single day that the government holds back these funds, these projects fall further and further behind. That's why we need a commitment to a 10-year major capital programme to give long-term certainty to NHS planners to replace and repair hospital buildings regardless of who is in power. This must also come with the powers for NHS hospital trusts to spend the money that they themselves have raised from selling land or buildings so they can start fixing their hospital buildings themselves without having to wait for the government to get their act together. We also need to see a national risk register for RAC-infested buildings and for the government to bring forward their commitment to eradicate it. Conference, this is not just about buildings. It's about people. Within our hospitals are patients, patients who are scared and tired and ill, waiting for an operation next door to a room that's being held up by iron stilts. It's about the overworked and underpaid porter pushing a scared patient around in a wheelchair just past the pest control. And if there is one image for me that will sum up this Conservative government, it will be the image of an overworked nurse trying to treat a sick patient whilst mopping up a sewage leak under the crumbling roof of one of our NHS hospitals. They have run our NHS into the ground. They have left our hospital buildings to crumble. Conference, you cannot trust the Conservatives with the NHS. For goodness sake, let's kick them out. Please support the motion.